Thomas Sowell fundamentally dislikes politics. He did not choose to become a politician, much to many of his fans' chagrin. But on the upside, we probably got quite a lot of more Thomas Sowell books and commentary because he chose to stay in the path that he enjoyed. So I'm happy about that. It says here he stays out of politics, even though he despises, well, as we'll learn in a second, Obama. It says here, my political bias is that I'm biased against politics. He hasn't been a registered member of any party since 1972. Why? Because politicians are very clever at what they do, but what they do rarely benefits the public. The real problem, he says, is re-election. Let's see what he has to say from the man himself.
Well, let me ask you about your politics. You talked about the race issue, and what are your politics outside of the race issue? How would you describe your...
Well, I always say that my political bias is that I'm biased against politics. And I haven't been a registered member of any political party since 1972. And I really am quite disenchanted with politics of all sorts.
Why?
Well, I guess mainly just by following what they do and how they do it. That they're really quite clever at things they do, but the things they do really don't benefit the public very much. And that's not just race issues, all issues in general.
What's it? Has this changed over the years since you've been watching this whole thing?
If it's changed, it's been for the worse. I see some hopeful signs. People are trying to talk about limiting the terms of congressmen. I would like to see it limited to one term. In other words, if you're going to allow a member of the House of Representatives, for example, to spend 4 years in Washington, I would rather that they change that to one 4-year term rather than two 2-year terms, because the problem is re-election. And as long as they have to be re-elected and have to raise all that money, then they're going to sell out the public interest to get the money. It's really quite simple. You know, for example, an industry like the sugar industry can contribute money to Congress, and Congress will appropriate enough money to the sugar industry, subsidies, to pay them back $1,000 on every dollar. Now, you can't get that kind of return on your investment many places. And so there's no sign that they're going to stop doing that. That either they're going to stop offering the money or that the Congress is going to stop giving the money.
All right, that's another good book from Sowell. Everyone should check that out. I've read double digits worth of books. However, I actually have not read Preferential Policies. But we're going to talk about Dismantling America in a second, which is another great book by Sowell, which I have read. Let's see what he has to say here about why he moved away from Marxism and gave up on politics.
Was this social justice stuff and this inequality stuff, these terms, these ambiguities, did that have an impact on you first being a Marxist and then realizing, wait a minute, this is all BS?
Yes, it did. And I think there's a very simple explanation that as of the time I became a Marxist, I didn't know as much as I knew after several years of study and observing things going on. And as facts carried a lot of weight with me, and when the facts kept going the wrong way, I realized that this was not going to do what it claimed it was going to do. One of the big problems about the social justice field is that what they say sounds so good. It's only after you study history that you find out just how bad, how horribly it actually turned out.
Well, these phrases are very nebulous. Social justice. What does that mean? Basically, if you agree with the Marxists and the leftists, then you support social justice. But on the other hand, if you support individuality and capitalism and private property rights, obviously you're anti-social justice. What does all this mean?
Well, that's how they look at it. They seem to assume a world in which if things don't turn out the same for everybody, that means that somebody has done somebody wrong. And that's an incredible assumption that human beings have such enormous control over their own fates individually or collectively. I mean, when I think back over my life, and I'm sure other people can do the same in their lives, there are times that a particular person appeared on the scene and changed the whole trajectory of my life. And it's happened more than once, and I'm sure it's happened in the lives of many other people. There's nobody out there who has all the incredible amount of knowledge required to take over making other people's decisions for them.
Great stuff from Thomas Sowell. Here's another one about how, politics, particularly under, how certain things destroyed the black family and why people are not allowed to discuss the successes from black America.
When they talk about things like this, they talk about the legacy of slavery.
Right, right.
And I argue, well, empirically, it's not that, it's the legacy of the welfare state. Because as of 1960, which is almost 100 years after slavery ended, the majority of black kids were being raised in two-parent households. But within one generation after the welfare state, that had dropped down to a minority. So that the majority of black kids today are raised in one-parent households. When you think about it, I mean, centuries of slavery and generations of Jim Crow did not destroy the black family, but one generation of the welfare state did.
That's absolutely so true, and incredibly sad that the welfare state resulted in exactly that happening. Here's some great quotes from the AEI.org, just a bunch of Thomas Sowell related quotes. The people on the political left have a certain set of opinions, just as people do in other parts of the ideological spectrum. It is not surprising. What is surprising, however, is how often the opinions of those on the left are accompanied by hostility and even hatred. Anyone who studies the history of ideas should notice how much more often people on the political left, more so than others, denigrate and demonize those who disagree with them, instead of answering their arguments. In a sense, the political left's attempts to silence ideas they cannot or will not debate are a confession of intellectual bankruptcy. And the list goes on. The vision of the left, full of envy and resentment, takes its worst toll on those at the bottom, whether black or white, who find in that paranoid vision an excuse for counterproductive and ultimately self-destructive attitudes and behaviors. So you can check those, like quite a lot of quotes from Thomas Sowell on the AEI, American Enterprise Institute website. And here's another little video about that book I mentioned earlier, Dismantling America, from the Hoover Institution. So we won't watch the whole video, but we'll watch some of it here.
While the Obama administration is not the root cause of the ominous dangers that face this country at home and abroad, it is the embodiment, the personification, and the culmination of dangerous trends that began decades ago. How does the President of the United States embody dangerous trends? How do you see this man?
Oh my gosh. I see him as someone who all his life has been associated with and part of a group of people who fundamentally don't believe in the principles of this country. Not only people, the most obvious example, obviously, is Jeremiah Wright. People like Bill Ayers, whom he's tried to disavow. But people who fundamentally think that we're on the wrong track, we have the wrong principles, and we need to be changed, whether we want to be or not.
Tom, you mentioned Jeremiah Wright, his pastor at a church in Chicago. You mentioned Bill Ayers, who was a former member of
the Weather Underground.
The Weather Underground, exactly. What about his formation, his intellectual formation at Columbia, Harvard Law School?
Well, as he himself says, he always sought out the most radical people. He worked as a community organizer. I don't think most people stop and think, what does a community organizer do? He doesn't organize a community.
It's not bake sales.
Huh?
It's not bake sales he's organizing.
No, he's not telling people in the community how to shop better and stuff like that. He is mobilizing all the resentments, organizing them in order to put them into a battle to get what they want from other people.
Now, you talk about Barack Obama as embodying dangerous trends, quote, that began decades ago.
Oh, yes.
When? This is during your lifetime, during your adult lifetime?
Yes, and perhaps even a little earlier. But I think what you see in the most clearly, I think, in the academic world, are people who don't think that this country is a great country. One example of a colleague of mine who teaches at Harvard, after 9/11, put an American flag on his car. And his colleagues said, "What is that for?" When I visited Berkeley in the aftermath of 9/11, when there were flags everywhere, I did not see one flag on the Berkeley campus on any of those expensive houses. When I was coming back from Berkeley, the first American flag I saw was in a low-income black neighborhood in Oakland.
These are people who consider themselves citizens of the world. And that the rest of us are so lucky to have them here to change America so that people like us don't have a voice. And of course, the whole way that Obama has operated with these enormous bills that no one has ever had time to read, that they rush through, where they're putting people in power who don't have to go through the confirmation process so that we don't find out what they're like except by if there's an expose on Fox News or someplace. I mean, his whole thing has been to circumvent the American public in order to put in things that they clearly don't want, as shown by the polls, as shown by this recent repudiation in Missouri.
All right, that's a question. Barack Obama won by about 7 percentage points. That's the biggest for a Democratic presidential candidate. Bill Clinton won by 8. FDR won by big. But he's in the top 3 Democratic finishers in the last 7 decades. Barack Obama is. So here's the question. You've described him, you've described the academic elites. To what extent the American people voted for him?
Yes.
To what extent do you see a corrosion of values among the American people themselves on the one hand? On the other hand, to what extent is there just a kind of creeping takeover by an elite that fails to share, that is opposed to the values that most Americans share?
There's both things. And I think part of the reason so many people voted for him was that what they got through the media was so filtered that they poo-pooed this man having been a member of a church run by a ranting racist because they wanted to believe that he was going to be a unifier. Community organizers don't unify. They divide. They polarize. That's how they get what they want. I never thought of Acorn as a unifying force in American life. And this man is not. But of course, if they don't know that, then of course they may vote for him.
So it's the press, it's Barack Obama and the administration, it's the elites at academic institutions.
But it's not just a thing that happened now. Long before Barack Obama's name became known, there was this attitude, essentially repudiating the principles of the country. I mean, it started, I think, with Woodrow Wilson, who was the first president of the United States to openly say that the Constitution, needed to be superseded. And he didn't mean that there needed to be amendments to the Constitution, which anybody can be for, but that the courts should do this. In other words, to circumvent the voting public, and put in the things that the judges think ought to be put in, irrespective of what the Constitution says.
Segment 2, Dismantling America. 2 quotations. The first comes from your book, Dismantling America. This segment is on marriage. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, you write, said that the life of the law has not been logic but experience. Vast numbers of laws have accumulated and evolved over the centuries based on experience with male-female unions. There is no reason why all those laws should be transferred willy-nilly to a different kind of union, one with neither the inherent tendency to produce children or the inherent asymmetries of relationships between people of different sexes. That's quotation 1. Here's quotation 2. U.S. District Judge Vaughn Walker, ruling in Perry versus Schwarzenegger on August 4th. Quote, "Gender no longer forms an essential part of marriage." Close quote. I just dropped that in your lap to see what you do with it, Dr. Sowell.
Well, the most important decision is always who makes the decision. And so the question is not what is the role of gender for this judge to decide, but since we are presumably still, for the moment at least, a self-governing nation, it's for the voting public to decide. And so the fact that he feels that way, that's wonderful. Let him vote that way in the privacy of the voting booth. But let him not say that this is now the law of the land just because he happens to think that way.
Tom, let me give you just another couple of quotations from Judge Vaughn Walker's ruling the other day. Judge Walker, the traditional understanding of marriage represents, quote, "nothing more than an artifact of a foregone notion that men and women fulfill different roles in civic life." Close quote. That's an artifact.
Well, one might say that Judge Walker is an artifact of what goes on in academia and particularly in the law schools. But again, the question is, whose decision is that? Is that judges there to decide that the rest of us, that what we believe is just not worth thinking about? Or is he there to carry out the laws that have been passed by the duly elected representatives?
Tom, you know that during this trial, he had a long fact-finding phase in which one sociologist and expert after another came in to testify about the roles of genders, the state of marriage in the 21st century, and so forth. You just brush all that aside?
No, none of that is a substitute for we the people, which is what the Constitution's about. When I could give you an impressive list of people who have said absurd things. In fact, if you were to make a list of all the absurd things said by brilliant people, it would be longer than the Encyclopedia Britannica.
All right. One more from Judge Walker here. Quote, "The evidence shows conclusively that moral and religious views form the only basis for the belief that same-sex couples are different from opposite-sex couples." Close quote.
Well, it may be conclusive to him, but again, the question is, whose decision is it? Obviously, it's not conclusive to other people, or else the proposition that he was ruling on would never have passed.
And been passed with the votes of 7 million Californians,
yes,
by the way. All right. So let me ask you, just step back from that a little bit and ask you this question. How did we go in the space of a couple of decades, maybe 3, but I think probably closer to 2, from an America in which the notion of same-sex marriage was literally unthinkable? That is to say, it was in nobody's head, so outlandish that it never occurred to anyone, to a sitting judge, federal judge, named to the federal bench, by the way, by George H.W. Bush.
Heaven help us.
Coming out with an opinion like this. What happened to the legal regime, to the social to the mores?
This is why I say that Obama is really the culmination of a trend. He didn't do this by himself. That there was a notion out there, a set of notions really, about the country, about what was right, and about who should make what decisions. Those notions were out there, before he ever became a public figure. But now that and I think what you saw was an erosion of the confidence in the country and the country's culture, its principles, and so forth. And all of this happened. And what is happening now is what was just an erosion, sort of almost uncoordinated and so on, to a deliberate attempt on his part to change the country in fundamental ways.
Now, you talked about Woodrow Wilson, with a certain kind of rot setting in with Woodrow Wilson, the progressives, the sort of elitism. Woodrow Wilson, know far better than that non-entity James Madison who drafted the Constitution. Right, all right. But in more recent times that you and I can remember, we had Ronald Reagan and the sense that somehow the country was coming back. How do we go from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama? How do you go from a reassertion of what seems to be fundamental faith in the country to a Judge Vaughn Walker? What happened in the space of just 2 or 3 decades?
Well, I think it started immediately with Reagan's successor, George H.W. Bush, no doubt a decent man, an honorable man, but one who disdained what he called this vision thing. In other words, that an overarching sense of principles that you'd be fighting for. To me, I think one of the moments that sort of gave a clue was when, during one of the presidential debates, when Bush was looking at his watch.
Right.
I can't imagine Ronald Reagan, or any Democrat for that matter, looking at his watch during Bush was, and I think the first moment that you saw a glimpse of this was when Bush first took office, Bush 41, and started talking about a kinder and gentler America. That it's kinder and gentler to tax the taxpayers in order to make it easier on people who have not lived up to their responsibilities. You see that right now carried to extremes in this administration, where people who never took out a $700,000 loan in their lives now have to subsidize people who did take out a $700,000 mortgage loan and couldn't afford it.
So it is the case that either you have a Ronald Reagan in place fighting for American principles, and Ronald Reagans don't come along that often, or even a Republican and temperamentally conservative president such as George H.W. Bush will come under such cultural and political pressures that the drift to the left, that will continue.
Yes, well, what you generally have had in recent times is people moving to the left rapidly under Democrats and slowly under Republicans.
All right. Segment 3, Dismantling the Culture, from your book.
All right, that's a great video. I highly recommend checking out the rest of it on the Hoover Institution website, on their YouTube channel, or checking them out on X. Definitely check all those guys out. And, like, share, comment on our videos as well. That'd be fantastic. It's a huge help when you follow the channel like that. So, if you guys could do that sort of thing going forward, that is great. Also, I just want to watch this video now. Thomas Sowell on Black Rednecks. Another book everyone should read.
How important is this book?
Is Black Rednecks and White Liberals. That's one of his best books, really.
Probably, it may be the most important because there are so many misconceptions about racial and ethnic issues that just straightening out the misconceptions is a major task in itself. I don't reach any kind of policy conclusions in this book because, as I say, it's a full-time job to get the facts straightened out. So I can write a column in a newspaper aimed at the general public, and there'll be extremely few misunderstandings of what I said. I can say the same things in a book that's aimed at intellectuals, and there'll be incredible twists and turning. Well, you seem to say this further than that. I remember one huge review trying to figure out the implications of ethnic America. And what made it a farce was that the last chapter of the book is titled Implications. So you don't have to guess what the implications I drew. They're right there. But I strongly suspect the person who wrote the review never got that far.
Black rednecks, who are they?
These would be blacks who came out of the Southern culture and who carried that culture with them north into the urban ghettos and into the ghettos of the South for that matter. And who have not moved out of that culture since. Over the years, both blacks and whites have moved away from that culture. But in the poorest and worst of the ghetto areas, there are lots of people who have not. And these it's a culture which didn't do whites any good, and it's certainly not doing blacks any good today. And the tragedy is that people regard this culture as somehow the authentic black culture, and therefore you're not to interfere with it. It's to be allowed to, and so they're cheering people on. It reminds me of a scene in the Blue Max where this general is encouraging this daredevil pilot to do all kinds of wild stunts, you see, knowing that the guy's going to kill himself if he keeps doing this, and therefore the general will be rid of a political problem. Now, I don't think that the white liberals are doing this deliberately, but I think the net results are the same. They are cheering blacks on and doing things that are absolutely self-destructive.
What's the difference between a black redneck and a white redneck?
Color.
I love it. All right, yeah, check out more Thomas Sowell every chance you get. It's great stuff. You can understand why he dislikes politics. It's not that much fun. Has a lot of downsides. Thanks for watching this long. Appreciate it. Have a great day.